This seat belongs to my father-in-law, so get out." My son Connor did not just say the words. He punctuated them with a physical shove that sent me sprawling across the hardwood floor I had installed with my own hands 20 years ago. I fell in front of the entire family. My hip hit the ground with a sickening thud that silenced the Christmas music. I looked up, expecting to see a hand reaching down to help me. Instead, I saw my daughter-in-law covering a giggle and my son looking away. He thought he had just asserted his dominance. He thought he was finally the man of the house. But what Connor did not know was that the moment my body hit the floor, the clock started ticking on his destruction. He went to sleep that night thinking he had won. When he woke up the next morning, he had 65 missed calls and a life that had completely evaporated. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just walked out into the snow and made the call that would turn his world into a living hell. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. My name is Bill Harrington. I am 68 years old. For 40 years, I poured concrete and framed houses in the biting cold and scorching heat of Pennsylvania so my son would never have to know what a callous felt like. I built a construction empire from a single rusty pickup truck and sold it for enough money to ensure 3 generations of Harringtons would never go hungry. But looking around my own dining room that Christmas Eve, I realized I had built a fortune but raised a fool. I walked into the house at 6 in the evening. The house technically belonged to a trust, but Connor and his wife Brittany lived there, as if they owned every brick. The air smelled of expensive perfume and entitlement. I was wearing my clean flannel shirt and dark jeans, practical clothes, honest clothes. But as soon as I stepped into the foyer, Brittany wrinkled her nose as if I had just crawled out of a sewer. "Oh, Bill," she said without looking up from her phone. "You are early. We have not even put the appetizers out yet. Maybe you can wait in the den until the important guests arrive." I ignored her and walked toward the dining room. My stomach was already churning. I had paid for the caterers. I had paid for the decorations. I had paid for the very phone she was scrolling on. But I was being treated like a hired hand who had shown up to fix the sink. I entered the dining room and stopped dead in my tracks. The long mahogany table was set for 12. It was the table my late wife Sarah and I had bought for our first real house. It was where we had celebrated Thanksgivings and birthdays. And at the head of the table sat Richard Sterling. Richard was Brittany's father. He was a man who wore $3,000 suits and leased luxury cars he could not afford. He called himself an investment banker. But in 40 years, I had never actually seen him invest anything other than other people's money into his own pockets. He was sitting in my chair. Not just any chair. The head of the table. The captain's chair. The spot where the patriarch sits, and in his hand he was holding a glass of dark red wine. I recognized the bottle sitting open in front of him. Chateau Margaux. 1982. A $3,000 bottle of wine I had been saving for Connor's first child. I had kept that bottle in the climate-controlled cellar for decades. Richard had popped the cork like it was cheap soda. "Well, look who it is," Richard boomed, his voice slurring slightly. "The builder has arrived. Come on in, Bill. We were just talking about high finance. Probably a bit over your head, but you can listen in." My hand clenched into a fist at my side. I walked over to the table. The room was crowded with Brittany's relatives, cousins I didn't know, aunts who looked at me with disdain. Every seat was taken. I looked at Connor. My son was standing near the buffet table, pretending to be very interested in a tray of shrimp. He was wearing a velvet blazer I had paid for and a watch I had given him for graduation. He refused to meet my eyes. "I need a seat," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the chatter. Richard laughed. He swirled my vintage wine in his glass. "Oh, Bill, surely you do not mind sitting down at the kids' table in the kitchen, do you? It is warmer in there. You know how you old folks get with the drafts. Besides, we are discussing business here. Serious business. He winked at the rest of the table, and a ripple of polite laughter went through the room. They were laughing at me. In the house I paid for, drinking my wine. I looked at the empty space next to Richard. There was a spare dining chair pushed against the wall. It was part of the set. I walked over and grabbed the back of it. "I will sit right here," I said. I started to pull the chair out. That was when Connor finally moved. He crossed the room in 3 strides and slammed his hand down on the back of the chair, stopping me cold. "No, Dad," Connor said. His voice was tight. "Excuse me," I said, looking at my son. "You cannot take that chair, Dad. That is for Richard's jacket." I stared at him. The room went silent. "You want me to go eat in the kitchen because you need this seat for a coat." Connor flushed red. He could feel the eyes of his wife and his father-in-law on him. He needed to perform. He needed to show them he was the big man. "It is an Italian silk blazer," Dad Connor snapped. "We are not going to drape it over a railing like some blue-collar rag. Just go to the kitchen. You are embarrassing Brittany." I looked at the jacket draped over the chair. It was flashy and tacky, just like Richard. Then I looked at Connor. I saw the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had sat up with when he had the flu. And now I saw a stranger. "I am sitting here, Connor," I said firmly. "Move the jacket." I tried to pull the chair again. "Get out, old man," Richard shouted from the head of the table. "Can't you see you are ruining the vibe? Listen to your son for once in your life." Encouraged by Richard's shouting, Connor made his move. He did not just block me. He grabbed my shoulder. "I said leave," he gritted out. He shoved me. It was not a gentle nudge. It was a full-force push with the weight of a 32-year-old man behind it. I was 68. I was strong, but I was not expecting my own flesh and blood to assault me. My boots slipped on the polished wood. I went down hard. My hips slammed against the floorboards. My glasses flew off my face and skittered across the room. A sharp pain shot up my spine. For a moment the world spun. I lay there on the floor of my own dining room. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then I heard it. A giggle. It was high-pitched and cruel. I looked up and saw Brittany covering her mouth, but her eyes were dancing with amusement. Then Richard chuckled. "Oops," Richard said. "Gravity is a bitch, isn't it, Bill?" Connor stood over me. He was breathing hard. For a split second, I saw panic in his eyes. He realized what he had done. But then he looked at Brittany. He looked at Richard, and the panic hardened into arrogance. "I told you to go to the kitchen," Connor said coldly. He did not offer me a hand. He did not ask if I was hurt. He turned his back on me and picked up his wine glass. I slowly pushed myself up. My hip throbbed with a dull fire. My dignity burned hotter. I picked up my glasses. One of the lenses was cracked, a spiderweb fracture right down the middle. I put them on. The room was fractured now, split in 2. The reality I thought I had, and the reality that actually existed. I did not say a word. I did not curse. I did not demand an apology. I brushed the dust off my flannel shirt. I looked at Connor's back one last time. I memorized the way he stood there swirling his drink, trying to look powerful. I turned around and walked to the front door. "Where are you going, Bill?" Richard called out. "Do not run off crying now. We saved you a turkey leg." I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face. It felt good. It felt clean. I walked to my truck. It was a 10-year-old Ford F-150. Rusty around the wheel wells, but the engine was pristine. I climbed in and started the ignition. The heater rattled to life. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from Connor. "Do not be dramatic, Dad. Just come back inside and eat in the kitchen." We will let you take some leftovers home if you behave. I looked at the message. Then I deleted it. I did not drive home. I drove toward the city center. It was Christmas Eve. Most businesses were closed. The streets were empty except for the occasional snowplow. I pulled up to a glass office building downtown. The lights were off on every floor except one. The corner office on the 12th floor. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Leo, I said. I am downstairs. Leo Katz was my lawyer. He was also the only man in this city I trusted with my life. He was Jewish, so Christmas was just another Tuesday for him, but even if it was not, he would have answered. Come up, Bill, Leo said. His voice was serious. He could hear the edge in mine. I took the elevator up. My hip was stiffening up. Every step was a reminder of the shove, a reminder of the betrayal. Leo was waiting for me with a pot of black coffee. He took one look at my cracked glasses and the dust on my jeans, and he knew. They crossed the line, Leo asked. They did not just cross it, I said, sitting down in the leather chair opposite his desk. They erased it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black notebook. I laid it on the desk. Execute the Omega Protocol, I said. Leo paused. Leo. He took off his reading glasses. He looked at me with deep concern. Bill, he said softly. Are you sure? Once we start this, there is no going back. That is your son. That is Sarah's only child. I looked out the window at the city lights. I thought about Sarah. I thought about how she had made me promise to take care of him. I realized in that moment that taking care of him meant stopping him from becoming a monster. And it was already too late for that. I looked back at Leo. Because he is Sarah's son, I have to do this. If I let him get away with this, he will never be a man. He is a parasite, Leo. And tonight, I am the medicine. Leo nodded slowly. He opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Where do we start, he asked. Level 1, I said. The credit. Cancel the American Express black card, I said. The one Brittany uses to buy her handbags. It has a $50,000 a month limit. Cut it to 0. Mark it as reported lost or stolen so the terminal declines it with a fraud alert. I want them to feel the shame publicly. Done, Leo said, typing furiously. Level 2, I continued. The house. Leo looked up. The trust controls the property. Connor is just a beneficiary with residency privileges. Revoke the privileges, I said. Clause 7B of the trust agreement. Residency is contingent on moral conduct and maintaining a relationship of respect with the grantor. He physically assaulted the grantor tonight. I saw Leo's eyes widen. He hit you. He pushed me, I said. In front of Richard Sterling. Leo's face hardened. He hit the enter key with force. Notice of eviction prepared. I will have the process server ready at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Level 3, I said. My voice dropped an octave. The business. Connor's tech startup was funded entirely by a callable loan from my holding company. $1.2 million. Call the loan, I said. Bill Leo warned. That will bankrupt the company immediately. He does not have the liquidity to repay that. I know, I said. He has 48 hours to pay in full or I seize the assets, including the intellectual property and the lease on his office space. Send the demand letter now. I watched Leo work. Every keystroke was a hammer blow to the life Connor thought he was entitled to. There is one more thing, I said. Leo looked up, waiting. The smart home system, I said. The heating, the lights, the security gates. The account is in my name. I pay the bill. Kill it, I said. You mean shut off the service, Leo asked. No, I said. I mean lock them out. Change the master password. Set the thermostat to 40 degrees. Just enough so the pipes do not burst. but low enough that they will see their breath in the morning. And lock the front gates. If they want to leave, they will have to climb over the fence. Leo typed the final command. He looked at me. It is done, Bill. By sunrise, they will be destitute, freezing, and locked inside a house they no longer have the right to live in. I stood up. My hips screamed in protest, but I ignored it. Thank you, Leo. Send me the bill. I walked back to the elevator. I checked my phone. Midnight. Christmas Day had just begun. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Connor. Seriously, Dad, are you coming back? Richard is about to open the cognac. You are missing out. I looked at the screen. I did not reply. I turned the phone off. I got into my truck and drove to my small apartment on the other side of town. The one I stayed in when I wanted to be close to the old neighborhood. It was small. It was quiet. And it was mine. I poured myself a glass of whiskey. I sat in a chair full that no one would ever push me out of. I closed my eyes and waited for the sun to rise. I waited for the screaming to start. Because tomorrow morning, Connor Harrington was going to learn a lesson that no amount of university education could teach him. He was going to learn that you never bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is the only thing holding you up from the abyss. The next morning, I woke up at 7. I turned my phone on. It vibrated instantly, and then again, and again. It danced across the nightstand like a possessed thing. 10 missed calls, 20, 30. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I drank it slowly, enjoying the silence. By the time I finished my first cup, the counter was up to 65 missed calls, 40 from Connor, 15 from Brittany, 10 from Richard Sterling. I smiled. The rats were awake, and the ship was already sinking. I let it ring one more time. Then I picked up my keys. It was time to go see what was left of my son. 7 in the morning on Christmas Day is supposed to be a time of warmth. It is supposed to be the smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven and the sound of soft jazz playing through the speakers. But at the Harrington estate this morning, there was only silence and a biting cold that settled into the bones. I was not there to see it, but I knew exactly what it felt like. I built that house. I knew that without the radiant floor heating running, the Italian marble tiles in the master bathroom became blocks of ice. I knew that without the central furnace pumping hot air, the high vaulted ceilings that Brittany loved so much turned the living room into a refrigerator. At 7 o'clock precisely, Connor opened his eyes. He was buried under 3 layers of Egyptian cotton sheets, but he was shivering. He reached out instinctively to pull the duvet higher, but the cold was already seeping through the mattress. The thermostat on the wall, which usually glowed with a comforting orange light, was dark. The ambient temperature in the room had dropped to 40 degrees Fahrenheit during the night. Connor groaned and sat up. His head was pounding. The vintage Chateau Margaux he had stolen from me the night before had left him with a vicious hangover. He rubbed his temples and swung his legs out of bed. His bare feet hit the floor, and he immediately recoiled. It was like stepping onto a frozen lake. Brittany was still asleep, curled into a tight ball on her side of the bed. She was wearing a silk sleep mask and expensive earplugs, oblivious to the temperature shift for now. Connor stood up, wrapping his robe tightly around himself. He walked over to the smart thermostat and tapped the screen. Nothing happened. He tapped it harder. The screen remained black. "Damn it," he muttered, his voice raspy from sleep and alcohol. He assumed it was a power outage. A winter storm had been forecasted, and in his mind, this was just an inconvenience caused by nature. He did not yet realize that the storm was not outside. The storm was me. He shuffled out of the bedroom and down the long hallway. The house was dead silent. Usually, the smart home system would have gradually brought up the lights and started a morning playlist by now. Today, the hallway was gray and shadowy. He walked past the guest room where his father-in-law Richard Sterling was sleeping. He could hear Richard snoring loudly, a jagged, rasping sound that echoed in the cold house. The man who had insulted me and taken my seat at the table was sleeping soundly, while the empire around him was being dismantled bite by bite. Connor reached the kitchen. It was a mess. The catering staff had left the night before, but there were still wine glasses on the counter and crumbs on the floor. The sight of the dirty dishes irritated him. He was used to things being clean. He was used to things being handled. He needed coffee. He needed it desperately to fight the headache that was splitting his skull. He walked over to the espresso machine. It was a Breville Oracle Touch, a $2,000 piece of machinery that could make a latte better than any barista. I knew the price because I had bought it for them, Sam, as a housewarming gift 3 years ago. Connor reached for the power button. He pressed it, expecting the familiar hum of the boiler heating up and the digital display to welcome him. Silence. He pressed it again. Harder this time. The machine was dead. A cold, lifeless block of stainless steel. Connor frowned. He checked the plug. It was securely in the outlet. He looked at the microwave clock. It was blank. He looked at the refrigerator. The display was dark. "This is ridiculous," he said to the empty room. He walked over to the window and looked out. This was the moment where the doubt should have crept in. He looked across the street at the neighbor's house. The Johnsons had their Christmas lights on. Their windows were glowing with warmth. The streetlights were still humming. The power grid was perfectly fine. But Connor was not a man who looked for his own faults. He was a man who looked for someone to blame. "It is the wiring," he grumbled. "Dad probably used cheap breakers when he built this place. Cutting corners again." He turned away from the window, convinced that this was just a technical glitch. A fuse that had blown. A breaker that had tripped. He did not know that at that very moment I was sitting in my small apartment holding my phone watching the status of his smart hub. I had not just cut the power. I had remotely locked the breaker panel. Even if he went down to the basement, he would not be able to reset it without the biometric code. And that code was my fingerprint. Suddenly, a scream pierced the silence of the house. It came from the master bathroom upstairs. It was a high-pitched shriek of pure shock. Connor dropped the mug he was holding. It shattered on the floor, but he didn't stop to look. He ran up the stairs, his heart pounding. He thought someone had broken in. He thought Brittany was hurt. He burst into the bedroom and ran to the bathroom door. "Brittany," he yelled. "Are you okay?" The glass door of the shower was steamed up, but only slightly. Brittany pushed it open and stepped out, grabbing a towel frantically. Her skin was covered in goosebumps, and her lips were pale blue. The water, she screamed, wrapping the towel around herself. "It is freezing. It is like ice water, Connor." Connor stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "The heater is tankless. It is instant." "I don't care what it is," she yelled, her teeth chattering. "I turned it on and it was fine for 2 seconds, and then it went completely cold. I have shampoo in my hair, Connor. Look at me. I am freezing." She was shivering violently. The bathroom floor was just as cold as the bedroom. There was no heat lamp, no heated towel rack. The luxury spa experience she was used to had turned into a polar plunge. "Fix it," she demanded, stomping her foot. "Go down to the basement and fix the heater. My parents are going to be up soon. I cannot have my dad showering in cold water. This is humiliating." Connor ran a hand through his hair. His headache was getting worse. The cold was making his joints ache. "I think a breaker tripped," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "The coffee machine is down too. I will go check the box." He turned to leave, but Brittany grabbed his arm. Her nails dug into his skin. "Why is it so cold in here?" she hissed. She looked at the thermostat. It was still black. "The heat is off too, Connor. It is 40 degrees in here." "What is going on?" "It is just a glitch," Connor snapped, pulling his arm away. "Stop panicking. The system probably just needs a reboot." You know how this smart crap is. Dad always insisted on installing the most complicated system possible just to show off. It probably crashed. He walked out of the room trying to maintain his composure, but deep down a small knot of fear was beginning to form in his stomach. He was not a handyman. He did not know how to fix things. He was a man who called people to fix things, and the man he usually called was me. He walked down the stairs again. The cold seemed to be getting aggressive now. It bit at his exposed ankles. He reached the basement door and turned the handle. Locked. He frowned. He twisted it again. It would not budge. The basement door had a smart lock on it. I had installed it to keep his future children safe from the tools and equipment stored down there. But right now it was keeping him out of the control room of his own life. He punched in the code on the keypad. 1990. His birth year. The keypad flashed red. Access denied. He tried again, slower this time. 1990. Access denied. Connor kicked the door. A dull thud echoed through the house. "Open, you stupid thing," he yelled. From the top of the stairs, he heard a door open. Richard Sterling shuffled out of the guest room. He was wearing silk pajamas and a matching robe. He looked groggy and annoyed. "What is all the racket?" Richard grumbled, leaning over the railing. "And why is it colder than a meat locker in here? I am trying to sleep off a headache." "The system is down," Connor called up, his voice tight with frustration. "I am locked out of the basement. I think the battery in the lock died or something." Richard laughed, a dry, condescending sound. "Well, call a locksmith. Or better yet, call your father. He built this monstrosity, didn't he? Get him over here to fix it. That is what he is good for, right? Fixing things." Connor froze. Call his father. The thought made his stomach turn. After last night. After the shove. After the way I had walked out. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. He stared at my contact name. Dad. He hesitated. His pride was still stinging. He did not want to ask for help. But the cold was real. Brittany was screaming upstairs. The coffee machine was dead. And he was standing in the dark in a house that was rapidly becoming a tomb. He pressed call. He put the phone to his ear, expecting to hear my voice. Expecting me to be angry, but eventually willing to come over and flip the switch. He expected me to be the safety net I had always been. The phone rang once. Then it went straight to voicemail. He redialed. Voicemail. He dialed again and again. His fingers moved faster with each attempt. The panic was starting to set in. Not because he thought I was doing this on purpose, but because for the first time in his life I was not picking up. He did not know what I was watching the call log on my screen. 7:15 a.m. Missed call number 1. By the time he stopped dialing an hour later, that number would be 65, and the temperature in the house would have dropped another 5 degrees. This was not a glitch, Connor. This was the new reality. Welcome to the cold. The cold was no longer just a physical sensation inside the house. It was a panic that was starting to set in. Connor and Richard stood in the kitchen, their breath visible in the freezing air. The coffee machine was dead. The heater was dead. The silence of the house was heavy and oppressive. "We need to get out of here," Richard barked, pulling his cashmere scarf tighter around his neck. "This is ridiculous. I am not going to freeze to death in a house that costs $2 million. Let us go to the club. We can get breakfast there, and I can call my lawyer to sue the utility company for this incompetence." Connor nodded, eager to escape the failure of his smart home. He grabbed his car keys from the bowl near the door. The heavy fob of the Mercedes S-Class felt reassuring in his hand. It was a symbol of power. A symbol that no matter what happened inside the house, he still had a $100,000 machine waiting for him in the garage. They walked to the door connecting the kitchen to the garage. Connor opened it, expecting the familiar smell of gasoline and leather. He pressed the button on the wall to open the main garage door. The heavy motorized door rumbled upward, letting in the harsh gray light of the winter morning. But as the door rose, it revealed nothing but concrete. Empty, stained concrete. Connor froze. He blinked several times, thinking that perhaps the cold had affected his vision. He stepped forward, his voice echoing in the hollow space. "Where is the car?" He looked to the left where Brittany's Porsche Cayenne usually sat. It was gone too. The garage was completely empty. There was no broken glass, no sign of a forced entry, just 2 empty parking spots and a small oil stain on the floor. "My car," Richard yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "My Bentley. I parked it in the driveway because your garage was full. Where is my Bentley, Connor?" Connor ran out onto the driveway. The snow had been cleared, but not by a plow. It had been cleared by the tires of heavy machinery. Drag marks were visible on the asphalt. "It is gone," Connor whispered. "They are all gone." He did not understand. He thought it was a theft, a targeted heist. But thieves do not take 3 luxury cars without waking up the house. Thieves do not leave the driveway perfectly intact. I watched this scene unfold from the security camera feed on my tablet. I took a sip of my coffee. I had not hired thieves. I had hired a repossession crew. The Mercedes and the Porsche were leased under my construction company's name. It was a tax write-off I had allowed Connor to use, a perk of being the boss's son. But he was no longer the boss's son. He was a trespasser. And as for Richard's Bentley, well, that was the cherry on top. I had run a plate check the night before. The Bentley was a rental from a luxury leasing agency, and Richard was 3 months behind on payments. I simply tipped off the agency where the car was parked. They were more than happy to collect it, along with mine, at 4 in the morning. "Call the police," Richard screamed, waving his arms. "Call them now. This is Grand Theft Auto." Connor pulled out his phone again. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. But before he could dial 911, a notification popped up on his screen. It was an email from the leasing company. Subject: Lease termination notice, due to violation of Contract Clause 4A, unauthorized driver and failure to maintain good standing. Connor stared at the words. Violation of contract. "Dad did this," he whispered. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Dad took the cars. Richard stopped screaming. He looked at Connor with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "Your father took my car too," he hissed. "No," Connor said, his voice trembling. "The rental agency took yours. Dad must have told them where it was." They stood there in the driveway, 2 men in expensive coats with absolutely nowhere to go. The wind whipped around them, biting at their exposed faces. "We need a ride," Richard snapped. "I am not standing here freezing. Order an Uber. Order a black car, the big SUV, and order some coffee to be delivered while we wait. I need caffeine before I kill someone." Connor nodded. He needed to fix this. He needed to regain control. He opened the Uber app. He selected the destination, the country club. He selected Uber Black. The price was surged due to the holiday demand. $85. He didn't care. He hit request ride. Processing payment. The little wheel spun on the screen. Connor held his breath. Transaction declined. He frowned. He tried again. Maybe it was a signal issue. Transaction declined. Please update your payment method. He switched cards. He tried his personal Visa, the one I put $5,000 a month into for his incidental expenses. Transaction declined. Action. Insufficient funds. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead that had nothing to do with the winter air. He tried the joint account he shared with Brittany. Transaction declined. Account frozen by bank administration. Connor stared at the phone. It was not just the cars. It was everything. Every single financial artery had been severed. "What is taking so long?" Richard demanded, stamping his feet to keep warm. "The app isn't working." Connor lied. His voice was high and thin. "The network is busy." "Try Starbucks," Richard said. "Just get us some coffee and breakfast sandwiches delivered here. We can figure out the car situation after we eat." Connor switched apps. He added 3 lattes and 4 croissants to the cart. Total $42. Place order. Payment failed. Contact your financial institution. Connor lowered the phone. He looked at Richard. He could not hide it anymore. The screen was still glowing with the red error message. "I can't," he said. "The cards are not working. All of them." Richard stared at him. The man who claimed to manage millions of dollars in assets looked at his son-in-law with pure contempt. "You are telling me you are broke," Richard sneered. "You are telling me that the great Connor Harrington cannot buy a cup of coffee." "It is Dad," Connor pleaded. "He must have frozen everything. He is trying to scare us." Just then a bicycle came down the driveway. It was the neighborhood paperboy, a teenager named Timmy. He was struggling through the light snow to deliver the Christmas morning edition of the Gazette. He stopped his bike near the 2 men. He pulled a newspaper from his bag. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Harrington," Timmy said cheerfully. He held the paper out. He didn't throw it. He waited. I knew why he waited. Every year I gave Timmy a $50 bill on Christmas morning. It was a tradition. Timmy looked at Connor, expecting the same. Connor looked away, his face burning with shame. He had no cash. He never carried cash. Richard stepped forward. He saw an opportunity to be the big man, to show Connor how it was done. "Merry Christmas, son," Richard said, reaching into his long wool coat. He patted his chest pocket. He patted his side pockets. He paused. He patted his back pocket. The smile on his face faltered. Richard Sterling, the man who bragged about his investment portfolio, the man who wore a $5,000 watch, froze. He realized his wallet was empty. Not because he had forgotten to go to the bank, but because he had been living on credit for the last decade. He had 0 liquidity. He did not even have a $5 bill to give a kid in the snow. Timmy waited, his smile fading slightly. Richard cleared his throat. He looked at the boy, then at the ground. "I seem to have left my money clip inside," Richard mumbled. "Catch you next time, kid." Timmy's face fell. He looked at the 2 men standing in the driveway of a mansion, without a car, without heat, and apparently without a single dollar between them. "Okay," Timmy said quietly. "Merry Christmas, anyway." He tossed the paper onto the wet snow at Richard's feet and pedaled away. Richard stared at the newspaper. It was soaking up the slush. The headline was visible. "Record low temperatures expected today." He looked at Connor. For the first time, the arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. "We are trapped," Richard whispered. "We are trapped here, Connor." Connor didn't answer. He was looking at his phone again, at the 65 missed calls he had made to me. He realized now why I hadn't answered. I didn't need to speak to him. My silence was speaking louder than any words I could have shouted. I had stripped them naked in the middle of winter, and the day had only just begun. Connor stood in the driveway with the phone pressed to his ear, his knuckles white from the cold and the grip of his rage. He dialed my number again. 66, 67, 68. Each unanswered ring was a hammer blow to his ego. He could not comprehend that I was simply ignoring him. In his world, people answered him, employees answered, waiters answered, and I had always answered. But the silence on the other end was absolute. He lowered the phone and looked at Richard. The older man was stomping his feet in his Italian loafers, his face a mask of misery. Call the police, Richard hissed through chattering teeth. Do not waste time with your father. He obviously hired criminals to take the cars. This is a felony. Call 911 and get a squad car out here. I want an APB put out on my Bentley. Connor nodded. It felt like a solution. It felt like action. He dialed 911. Emergency services, what is your emergency? My car was stolen, Connor shouted into the phone, his voice cracking. Callous. 3 cars, actually. A Mercedes S-Class, a Porsche Cayenne, and a Bentley Continental. They were taken from my garage in the last few hours. Are you in immediate danger? The dispatcher asked calmly. I am freezing to death, Connor snapped. And I am the victim of a major crime. Send someone to the Harrington estate immediately. He hung up, feeling a momentary surge of power. The law was on his side, or so he thought. He did not understand that the law protects ownership, not possession, and Connor owned nothing. 10 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up to the front gate. The lights were not flashing. The siren was silent. It was Officer Miller, a man I had known for 20 years, a man whose daughter's college tuition I had helped pay for through my scholarship fund. Connor ran to the gate, waving his arms. Over here, he yelled. They took everything. Officer Miller stepped out of the cruiser. He did not rush. He adjusted his belt and walked slowly toward the iron gate that separated the estate from the street. Connor pressed the button to open the gate. Nothing happened. Open it, Connor yelled at the keypad. It is locked. Officer Miller said calmly, standing on the other side of the bars. My dad locked it, Connor explained quickly. He is having a mental breakdown or something. He stole the cars and locked us in. You need to break the lock, officer. You need to get in here and take a report. Officer Miller looked at Connor, then at Richard, who was shivering in the background. He did not reach for his bolt cutters. He reached for his tablet. Mr. Harrington, he said. I received a call about Grand Theft Auto. Yes, Connor said, grabbing the iron bars. 3 vehicles, worth over $500,000. My father, William Harrington, took them. Arrest him. Officer Miller tapped the screen of his tablet. He scrolled through a few lines of text. I have the report right here, Connor, but it is not a theft report. It is a repossession notice filed at 4:00 a.m. this morning. Connor froze. What? The vehicles in question, Miller read, his voice flat and professional. 1 Mercedes, 1 Porsche, registered to Harrington Construction, LLC, 1 Bentley, registered to Luxury Leases, Inc. All 3 vehicles were retrieved by licensed recovery agents due to lease violations and default on payments. That is a lie, Connor screamed, shaking the gate. The Mercedes is mine. It was a gift. Do you have the title? Miller asked, looking up. Connor opened his mouth, then closed it. He did not have the title. He had never seen a title in his life. He just drove the cars. My dad gave it to me, he stammered. According to the DMV database, William Harrington is the sole owner of the construction vehicles, Miller said, and he authorized their removal. As for the Bentley, the rental agency reported it stolen by a Richard Sterling 3 months ago when payments stopped. They were very happy to finally locate it. Richard let out a choked sound from behind Connor. He turned away, pretending to examine a snow-covered bush to hide his humiliation. This is insane, Connor said, his voice rising to a shriek. You are supposed to help me. I am a victim here. My father has locked me in a freezing house with no food and no car. That is unlawful imprisonment. Officer Miller looked at the gate. Then he looked at the small pedestrian side gate 5 feet to the left. It was unlocked. I had left it unlocked on purpose. You are not imprisoned, son, Miller said, pointing. You are free to walk out that side gate anytime you want. You just cannot take the property with you. Connor stared at the side gate, the walk of shame. And as for the house, Miller continued, looking at his notes again. I just got off the phone with your father before I arrived. He wanted me to pass along a message since you seem to be having trouble reaching him. Connor gripped the cold iron bars tighter. What message? Your father says that you are currently an overdue guest, Miller said. He states that the tenancy agreement was verbal and contingent on good behavior. He says that last night's assault constitutes a breach of that agreement. Assault, Connor whispered. He says you have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Miller said. He has a private security team scheduled to arrive at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow to secure the property. If you are still inside, you will be trespassing. Trespassing, Connor yelled. I live here. This is my home. My wife's clothes are in the closet. My life is here. Not anymore, Miller said. Connor felt the blood rushing to his head. He wanted to hit something. He wanted to push Officer Miller just like he had pushed me. This is harassment, he shouted. I am filing a complaint. I am going to sue the department. I am going to sue my father. You cannot just kick people out in the winter. Officer Miller's expression hardened. The patience was gone. Listen to me closely, Mr. Harrington. Miller said, his voice dropping to a warning tone. You called 911 to report a felony theft that you knew was not a theft. You wasted police resources. You are making false accusations against a respected member of this community. I am not, Connor started. If you call 911 again without a life-threatening emergency, Miller interrupted, I will arrest you for filing a false report. I will put you in the back of this car and I will take you to the station. And I promise you, the holding cell is colder than your living room. Connor shut his mouth. The threat was real. He could see it in Miller's eyes. Miller tipped his hat slightly. Stay warm, Connor. You have 23 hours left. The officer turned and walked back to his cruiser. He got in and drove away, leaving tire tracks in the fresh snow. Connor stood alone at the gate. He watched the taillights disappear. He looked down at his hands. They were red and raw from gripping the cold iron. He turned around. Richard was standing there, looking smaller and older than he ever had before. He is kicking us out, Richard whispered. He is actually doing it. Connor looked at the massive house behind them. The house that looked like a fortress. It was a fortress. But the enemy was already inside the walls. And the enemy was the man who had built it. We need to leave, Connor, said his voice hollow. We need to go to Dad's place. The old apartment. Richard looked at him confused. Why would we go there? He hates us. Because Connor said, staring at the dark windows of the mansion. It is the only place left where I might still have a key. And because I need to look him in the eye and ask him why he is destroying me. He did not know yet that the key to the old apartment would not work either. He did not know that the destruction was not an act of hate, but an act of surgery. I was cutting out the cancer to save the patient. But the patient had to bleed first. The ride to my apartment was the longest 20 minutes of Connor's life. They could not take an Uber Black. They could not even take a regular Uber because every digital payment method they had was dead. They had to hail a yellow taxi on the street corner like common tourists. And the humiliation did not stop there. Between the cushions of the sofa and the pockets of their winter coats, they had managed to scrape together exactly $32 in crumpled bills and loose change. It was just enough to cover the fare to the south side of the city, but not enough for a tip. The driver, a heavy-set man with no patience for men in $3,000 suits counting out quarters, cursed them out as they exited the cab. He drove off, leaving them standing on the cracked sidewalk in front of the building that started it all. The building was a 6-story brick structure I had bought 30 years ago. It was not glamorous. There was no doorman. There was no heated driveway. But it was solid. It was warm. And most importantly, it was paid for. Connor looked up at the building with a sneer of disgust. He had always hated this place. When he was a teenager, he used to beg me to sell it. He called it an eyesore. He said it was embarrassing that his father, the great construction mogul, still kept a flophouse in the working-class district. He did not understand that this building was my anchor. It was the place I went when I needed to remember who I was before the money. And right now it was the only fortress I had left. I was sitting in my armchair watching the security monitor. The camera mounted above the front entrance showed a grainy black and white image of my son and his father-in-law. They looked like refugees from a high-fashion magazine shoot, shivering in the biting wind. Connor stepped forward and pressed the buzzer. I let it ring. He pressed it again, long and hard. I could hear the buzzing sound echo in my hallway, but I did not move. I took a sip of my whiskey. I wanted them to feel the cold. I wanted the frost to bite through their cashmere coats and remind them that warmth is a privilege, not a right. After the fifth ring, I finally stood up and walked to the intercom panel on the wall. I pressed the talk button. "Go away," I said. My voice was calm. It sounded tinny and distorted through the speaker downstairs, but the authority was unmistakable. Dad Connor shouted into the speaker. His voice was shaking. "Dad, please, open the door. It is freezing out here. We have nowhere to go. You have plenty of places to go," I replied. "You have friends, you have business associates, you have that exclusive club you pay $5,000 a year to be a member of. Go there." "I can't," Connor yelled. "I have no money. You cut me off. You took the cars. You locked the house. Dad, this is insane. You have made your point. Just let us in so we can warm up." I looked at the monitor. Connor was leaning against the doorframe, looking defeated. But Richard Sterling was standing behind him, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. "The apartment is small, Connor," I said. "There are only 2 chairs in the kitchen, and you know the rule. I only invite special people into my home." It was a cruel echo of the words his wife had used on me. Special people. I watched Connor flinch as the words hit him. He remembered. "This is not a game," Bill Richards' voice suddenly boomed through the speaker. He had shoved Connor aside and grabbed the intercom. "Listen to me, you stubborn old man. This is illegal. You are endangering the welfare of your family. I am a diabetic, Bill. If I stay out in this cold, my blood sugar will drop. I could go into a coma. Do you want that on your conscience?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You are not a diabetic, Richard," I said. "You are a hypochondriac who uses fake ailments to get out of paying restaurant bills. I have seen you eat 3 desserts in one sitting. You will survive the cold. The fat on your ego alone will keep you warm for hours." "Open this door," Richard screamed, losing his composure. "We are family, damn it. You do not treat family like this. We made a mistake, okay? Connor made a mistake. He was stressed. He pushed you. He is sorry. Aren't you, Connor? Tell him you are sorry." I heard Connor mumbling something in the background, but I did not care. An apology born from frostbite is not an apology. It is a transaction. "You want to talk about family, Richard?" I asked, leaning closer to the microphone. "Let us talk about family. You have been staying in my house for 3 months. You eat my food. You drink my wine. You drive cars leased in my name. And yet you treat me like the help." "I am a guest," Richard sputtered. "I am helping Connor with his business. I am mentoring him. Mentoring him," I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" "I call it grooming. You are grooming him to be just like you. A man who looks rich but is hollow inside." "That is enough," Connor shouted, stepping back in front of the camera. "Stop insulting him, Dad. Richard is a respected investor. He is trying to secure a future for Brittany and me. He has a deal on the table that is going to make us millions." I sighed. It was the sigh of a man watching a car crash in slow motion. "There is no deal, Connor," I said softly. "What are you talking about?" Connor asked. "There is no deal," I said, my voice hard as stone. "Just like there is no investment portfolio. Just like there is no penthouse in New York that Richard claims is being renovated. It is all smoke, Connor. You are lying, Connor said, but his voice wavered. He is jealous, Richard. Do not listen to him. Richard, tell him I said. Tell him why you really moved into my house 3 months ago. Tell him why you sold your condo in Miami in such a hurry. Richard was silent. On the screen, I saw him looking around nervously, as if searching for an escape route. He won't tell you, Connor. I continued. So I will. Your father-in-law is not here to help you. He is hiding. Hiding from who, Connor asked. From the Vinnie Moretti group in Las Vegas, I said, dropping the bomb. The silence on the street was heavier than the snow. I hired a private investigator last week. Connor, I said. I wanted to know who was sitting at the head of my table. It turns out Richard had a very bad run at the blackjack tables at Caesar's Palace last October. He owes $500,000 to people who do not send demand letters. They send guys with baseball bats. That is a lie. Richard screamed, his face pressed close to the camera lens. His eyes were wide with terror. Do not listen to him, Connor. He is senile. He is making it up to ruin us. Check his pockets, Connor, I said. What? Connor asked, confused. Check his pockets, I commanded. Why do you think he had no cash for the paperboy this morning? Why do you think he made you pay for every dinner for the last 3 months? Why do you think he took over your office? He is broke, Connor. He has been bankrupt since 2018. He is using you as a shield. He thinks if he stays in the Harrington fortress, the bad men from Vegas won't find him. Connor turned slowly to look at Richard. The doubt was there now. It was spreading like a virus. Is that true? Connor asked, his voice barely a whisper. Richard, is that true? Richard stepped back. He adjusted his silk scarf, his hands trembling. Your father is crazy, Richard stammered. I have assets, illiquid assets. The market is just down right now. I am waiting for a transfer. Show him your banking app, Wujan, I said through the intercom. Richard froze. Go on, Connor, I urged. If he is a millionaire, ask him to show you his balance right now. It takes 5 seconds. Richard glared at the camera. If looks could kill, the lens would have shattered. I do not have to prove anything to you, he spat. Come on, Connor. We are leaving. We will find a hotel. I will call a friend. He reached out to grab Connor's arm, but for the first time, Connor pulled away. Show me the phone, Connor said. We do not have time for this, Richard yelled. Show me the damn phone, Connor roared. Richard flinched. He looked at Connor, then he looked at the street. He realized he had lost control. I forgot my password. Richard lied. I watched Connor's face crumble. The realization hit him harder than the cold. He had pushed away the man who built him a castle to serve a man who was building a house of cards. He had insulted his father to impress a fraud. Dad, Connor said, turning back to the intercom. His voice was broken. Dad. I didn't know. Please let me in. Let's talk about this. I looked at my son. I saw the pain in his face, and I felt a pang of guilt deep in my chest. But I knew I could not open that door. Not yet. If I opened it now, he would just be a scared boy running back to Daddy. He needed to be a man who faced his own mess. I cannot let you in, Connor, I said. Dad, please. You chose your family, I said. You chose the man who sat in my chair. You defended him. You assaulted me for him. Now you get to see what he is really worth. Dad, wait. Good luck, Connor, I said. I reached out and pressed the button to cut the feed. The screen went black. The sound of the wind cut off. The room was silent again. I walked to the window and looked down through the blinds. I saw Connor standing there, staring at the blank intercom box. Richard was saying something to him, waving his hands frantically, probably spinning another web of lies. But Connor was not looking at Richard anymore. He was looking at the old brick building. He was looking at the fortress he had despised. And for the first time, he looked like he understood what it really was. They stood there for another minute. Then Connor turned and started walking down the street. He did not wait for Richard. He walked alone, his head down against the wind. Richard hesitated, then scurried after him like a frightened rat. I watched them disappear around the corner. I went back to my chair and poured another glass of whiskey. My hand was shaking slightly. It is not easy to break your own child's heart. But sometimes you have to break a bone to reset it properly. And the surgery was not over yet. The anesthesia had worn off, and the real pain was just beginning. The Motel 6 on the edge of town smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. It was a far cry from the 5,000-square-foot mansion with the heated floors, but it was the only place that accepted cash payment without a credit card hold. Connor sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, his head in his hands. Brittany was pacing back and forth in front of the peeling wallpaper, her high heels clicking aggressively on the cheap laminate floor. She was not crying anymore. She was furious. And when Brittany was furious, she looked for someone to sue. "You cannot let him do this to us, Connor," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at him. "It is illegal. You have rights. We have lived in that house for 3 years. That makes us tenants. He cannot just lock us out in the middle of winter. That is called constructive eviction, and it is a crime." Connor looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He was broken, but Brittany was rebuilding him with rage. "He owns the house, Brittany." Connor said, his voice hoarse. "The trust owns it, and he controls the trust." "I don't care what piece of paper he has," she snapped. "Possession is 9/10 of the law. We receive mail there. Our clothes are there. By law, he has to give us 30 days' notice. He has to go through the courts. He cannot just play God because he paid for the bricks. We are going to sue him, Connor. We are going to sue him for every penny he has." She pulled a crumpled business card out of her purse. She had found it on the motel bulletin board next to an ad for a bail bondsman. "I called this guy," she said, handing the card to Connor. "Gary Slattery. He specializes in tenant rights. He said he can get us an emergency injunction. He said we can force your father to unlock the doors by this afternoon." Connor looked at the card. Gary Slattery. Attorney at law. The font was cheap, and the slogan read, "We fight for the little guy." Connor felt a twist of shame in his gut. He was going to sue his own father using a strip mall lawyer. But then he remembered the cold. He remembered the humiliation at the gate. He remembered the way I had looked at him through the intercom camera. "Call him," Connor said. 3 hours later, we were sitting in the conference room of Leo Katz's firm. The contrast could not have been more stark. Leo's office was on the 42nd floor overlooking the city skyline. The table was made of polished glass that cost more than Gary Slattery's car. I sat at the head of the table. Leo sat to my right, his face an impassive mask. Across from us sat Connor and Mr. Slattery. Slattery was a short man with a suit that was too shiny and a tie that was too wide. He smelled of cheap aftershave and nervousness. He was trying to look confident, but every time he looked at Leo, he swallowed hard. He knew he was out of his league, but Connor did not know that. Connor looked at me with a mix of defiance and fear. "Let us get straight to the point." Slattery began opening a thin file folder. "My clients have been the victims of an illegal lockout. Mr. Harrington, you have violated the Residential Tenancy Act in at least 5 different ways. You have cut off utilities, you have denied access to personal property, and you have done so without a court order." He paused, waiting for a reaction. I did not blink. I just watched Connor. "We are filing for an immediate emergency injunction." Slattery continued, his voice gaining a little volume. "We want the codes to the house restored immediately. We also want a reinstatement of the vehicle leases, which were wrongfully terminated. and we are preparing a civil suit for emotional distress and punitive damages. $2 million should cover the trauma my clients have endured in the last 24 hours. Connor nodded beside him. He felt empowered. He thought the law was a magic wand that could undo his mistakes. Is that all? Leo asked calmly. He had not taken a single note. That is the starting offer, Slattery said, puffing out his chest. If you do not agree, we will see you in court. And I promise you, the press will love the story of a billionaire father freezing his own son to death on Christmas. Leo smiled. It was a shark's smile, cold and sharp. He opened the thick leather binder in front of him. He turned a page slowly. The sound of the crisp paper turning was the only noise in the room, Mr. Slattery. Leo said, his voice smooth as silk. You are operating under the assumption that your client is a tenant. He is a tenant, Slattery shot back. He has lived there for 3 years. He has residency. Leo slid a document across the glass table. This is the document Connor signed 3 years ago before he moved in, Leo said. It is not a lease, it is a revocable license to occupy. Slattery grabbed the paper. He squinted at it. What is this? He muttered. It is a specific legal arrangement, Leo explained. Mr. Harrington did not rent the house to his son. He granted him a license to occupy the premises as a guest of the Harrington family trust. This license is not subject to standard landlord-tenant laws because no rent was ever exchanged. It was a charitable privilege. Slattery's face paled slightly. He scanned the document looking for a loophole. Even so, he argued, you cannot just revoke a license without cause. There has to be a reason. You cannot just kick a man out because you had a bad day. We have a reason, Leo said. He turned another page in the binder. Clause 7b. Leo read aloud. The licensee agrees that the right to occupy the premises is contingent upon maintaining the moral standards of the Harrington family. Any act of violence, criminal activity, or gross disrespect toward the grantor shall result in the immediate and automatic termination of this license without notice. Slattery stopped reading. He looked at Connor. Did you read this before you signed it? Slattery whispered to his client. Connor looked down. I just signed it, he mumbled. Dad said it was just for tax purposes. Leo reached for a tablet on the table. He tapped the screen and turned it around so Connor and his lawyer could see. This is the security footage from the dining room on Christmas Eve, Leo said. The video played. The quality was 4K crystal clear. It showed the dinner table. It showed Richard Sterling sitting in my chair holding my wine. It showed me walking in. And then it showed the moment. It showed Connor Harrington standing up. It showed the anger in his face. It showed him grabbing my shoulder. And it showed him shoving his 68-year-old father to the ground. The sound of my body hitting the floor echoed in the quiet conference room. Slattery watched the video. His mouth opened slightly. He watched me fall. He watched Connor turn his back. He paused the video. He looked at Connor with a look of pure disbelief. You pushed him, Slattery asked, his voice losing all its professional bluster. You assaulted the owner of the house. It was an accident, Connor stammered. I didn't mean to push him that hard. I was just trying to get him to leave. Leo closed the binder. The snap of the leather cover sounded like a gunshot. That is assault and battery, Leo stated. It is a felony. It is also a violation of Clause 7b. The license to occupy was terminated the second your hands touched your father. You are not a tenant, Mr. Harrington. You are a trespasser who assaulted his host. Leo looked at Slattery. If you file for an injunction, we will counter-sue for elder abuse, Leo said. We will hand this video over to the district attorney. We will press charges. Your client will not just be homeless. He will be a convicted felon. Is that a road you want to go down, Mr. Slattery? Slattery closed his folder. He pushed his chair back. The fight had left him completely. He realized he had been brought to a gunfight with a plastic knife. I need to consult with my client in private, Slattery said, wiping sweat from his forehead. No, Leo said, standing up. The meeting is over. The eviction stands. You have until 5:00 p.m. today to remove any remaining personal items from the property. After that, the locks will be changed permanently, and anything left inside will be donated to charity. I stood up too. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. I did not look at Connor. Dad, Connor whispered. His voice was small, like a child's. Dad, please. I didn't read the contract. I didn't know. I turned around slowly. I looked him dead in the eye. You wanted to be a businessman, Connor, I said. You wanted to sit at the big table with Richard Sterling and talk about deals. I took a step closer to him. Rule number 1 of business, I said, cold and hard. Always read the contract. And rule number 2, never bite the hand that feeds you unless you are sure you can survive the famine. Connor slumped in his chair. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. There was no lawsuit. There was no payout. There was no house. Brittany told me to do it, he whispered. She said we had rights. I looked at him with pity, but not mercy. You are a 32-year-old man, Connor, I said. Stop blaming your wife. Stop blaming me. You signed the paper. You pushed the man. Now you pay the price. I walked toward the door. Leo followed me. We left them there in the glass conference room. A son who had lost everything, and a cheap lawyer who was already calculating how quickly he could drop this case. As I walked to the elevator, I felt a heaviness in my chest. It is not a victory to defeat your own son. It is a tragedy. But it was a necessary tragedy. Because if I had let him win today, he would have lost his soul forever. The envelope was plain manila. No markings. No return address. It sat on the formica table of the diner like a loaded gun. I took a sip of my black coffee and looked at the man sitting across from me. Mike Reynolds did not look like a private investigator from the movies. He looked like an accountant who hadn't slept in a week. He wore a cheap windbreaker and smelled faintly of menthol cigarettes. But Mike could find a needle in a haystack, even if the needle was using an alias and living in the Cayman Islands. It is worse than we thought, Bill, Mike said, pushing the envelope toward me. I put down my cup. My hands were steady. I had spent 40 years in construction. I knew how to read blueprints, and I knew how to spot a crack in the foundation. Richard Sterling was not just a cracked foundation. He was a sinkhole. I opened the clasp. The first thing I saw was a photograph. It was grainy, taken with a long lens, but the subject was unmistakable. Richard Sterling. He was not wearing his usual Italian suit. He was wearing a rumpled polo shirt, and he was sweating. He was sitting at a blackjack table at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. The date stamp was from 3 months ago. He is not an investment banker, Mike said quietly. He has not made a trade in 5 years. His license was revoked by the SEC in 2019 for churning client accounts. I flipped through the pages. Bank statements, or rather lack of them. Negative balances. Overdraft fees. And then the big one. A lien on his Miami condo. Foreclosed. So he is broke, I said. It is not just that he is broke, Mike said, leaning in. It is who he owes money to. I turned the page. There was a list of names. They were not banks. They were not credit card companies. They were names like Vinny the Nose and Eastern Capital Management, which everyone in Pennsylvania knew was a front for the organized crime syndicate out of Philadelphia. He owes $500,000, Bill, and the interest is compounding weekly. That is why he is hiding in your house. He figures the mob won't touch him if he is living in the fortress of the great William Harrington. I felt a cold anger rising in my chest. It was one thing to be a leech. It was another thing to bring wolves to my doorstep. Richard had put my son and my daughter-in-law in danger just by being there. If those debt collectors decided to collect, they wouldn't care who got in the way. But there is more, Mike said. Look at the last document. This is what made me call you immediately. I pulled out the last sheet of paper. It was a loan application. A hard money loan. High risk. High interest. The kind of loan you take when you have a gun to your head. The principal amount was $1 million. The collateral was listed as intellectual property and assets of Harrington Tech Solutions. That was Connor's company. And there on the bottom line was a signature. Richard Sterling. And next to it, a blank space for a cosigner. He is trying to get Connor to sign this, I whispered. Mike nodded. He is selling it to Connor as a bridge loan. He is probably telling your son it is an investment for expansion. Something to take the company to the next level. But the minute Connor signs that paper, the money goes straight to the Sharks in Philly to pay off Richard's debt. And Connor is left on the hook for $1 million with an interest rate of 40%. I stared at the paper. This was not just fraud. This was sacrifice. Richard was going to feed my son to the wolves to save his own skin. He was going to take the company I had funded, the dream I had helped Connor build, and burn it to the ground, just to buy himself a few more months of life. I closed the file. I felt a strange sense of calm. The confusion was gone. The hesitation was gone. Can I keep this? I asked. It is your file, Mike said. You paid for it. What are you going to do, Bill? Are you going to the police? I shook my head. The police take too long. They file reports. They interview witnesses. By the time they arrest Richard, Connor might have already signed that paper. And the mob does not care about police reports. No police, I said. I am going to handle this the Harrington way. I stood up and placed $500 in cash on the table. Thank you, Mike. Go home. Get some sleep. I walked out to my truck. I sat there for a moment looking at the thick file. Knowledge is power, but only if you use it. I could drive to the house right now. I could kick the door down and wave these papers in Connor's face. But he wouldn't believe me. He would think I forged them. He would think I was just a jealous old man trying to sabotage his big deal. He needed to see it with his own eyes. And Richard needed to feel the heat. I drove to a copy center 3 blocks away. I walked in and went to the self-service machine. I made 2 copies of the file. For the first copy, I removed the photos of the mobsters. I kept the foreclosure notices, the SEC revocation letter, and the loan application. I took a red marker and I circled the cosigner line. Next to it, I wrote a simple note. Read before you sign. Dad. I put that stack in a sturdy envelope. I addressed it to Connor Harrington. I marked it urgent. For the second copy, I did something different. I kept the loan application, but I removed Connor's company information. Instead, I highlighted Richard's current address, the address of my house, the address where he was sleeping right now. And I added a copy of the foreclosure notice just to show that he had no other assets. I put that stack in a plain white envelope. I addressed it to Eastern Capital Management, the P.O. box in Philadelphia that was listed on the debt sheet. I walked up to the counter. The clerk was a young girl chewing gum. I need 2 couriers, I said. For this one, I pointed to Connor's envelope. I need a local bike messenger. It needs to be delivered to the Harrington estate within the hour. Do not give it to the older man. Give it only to Connor Harrington. And this one I asked, pointing to the second envelope. Overnight mail, the girl said, looking at the address. It will get to Philly by tomorrow morning. Perfect, I said. I paid the fee. I watched her slap the labels on. I watched the envelopes disappear into the outgoing bin. One envelope was a shield. It would break my son's heart, but it would save his life. It would shatter the illusion of the sophisticated father-in-law and show him the desperate con man underneath. The second envelope was a sword. It was a signal to the wolves. It told them exactly where their rabbit was hiding. It told them that the rabbit was broke and had no way to pay them unless he scammed a fresh victim. And knowing the mob, they would want to have a conversation with Richard before he tried to pull a fast one. I walked out into the winter afternoon. The wind was picking up. The forecast called for a blizzard. I got back in my truck and drove toward my apartment. I did not need to be there when the packages arrived. I knew exactly what would happen. Tonight, Connor would open that envelope. He would see the truth printed in black and white. He would see that the man he had chosen over me was planning to destroy him. And tomorrow morning, Richard would get a visit. Not from me, not from the police, but from men who did not care about social graces or silk blazers. I turned on the radio. A Christmas carol was playing. Silent Night. It was not going to be a silent night at the Harrington house. It was going to be the loudest night of their lives. The envelope I had sent via courier arrived at the Motel 6 at 7 in the evening. Connor opened it sitting on the edge of the bed, while Brittany was in the shower, trying to wash off the smell of cheap soap and failure. He read the documents. He saw the loan application. He saw the foreclosure notice. He saw the note I had written in red marker. Read before you sign. For a long time he just sat there staring at the wall. The radiator clanked and hissed. Outside, a police siren wailed in the distance. Connor was trying to process the fact that the man he had idolized, the man he had shoved his own father for, was a fraud. Part of him wanted to believe it was a lie. Part of him wanted to believe I had forged the documents out of spite. But deep down he knew. He knew because the math had never added up. The bathroom door opened and Brittany stepped out wrapped in a thin towel. "Where is my dad?" she asked, rubbing her hair. "He said he was going to get ice." Connor stood up. He held the papers in his hand. "He is not getting ice," Connor said quietly. He walked over to the closet. The door was open. Richard's suitcase was on the floor. It was open. And inside the suitcase, nestled between the silk shirts and the cashmere sweaters, was a velvet box. Connor recognized it immediately. It was Brittany's jewelry box, the one containing the diamond earrings I had given her for the wedding and the sapphire necklace Connor had bought her for their first anniversary. It was the only portable wealth they had managed to grab before leaving the mansion. And Richard Sterling was packing it. Just then, the motel door opened. Richard walked in. He was not holding a bucket of ice. He was holding a burner phone, and he looked panicked. "We need to move," he said, closing the door and locking it. "I just got a text. We are not safe here." He walked straight to the closet and reached for his suitcase. Connor stepped in front of him. "Where are you going, Richard?" Richard didn't look at him. He was focused on the bag. "I told you. We need to move. I have a friend in Chicago. We can stay there. But we need to leave now." "You mean you need to leave," Connor said, blocking the way. He held up the papers. "I know about the loan, Richard. I know about the mob in Philly. I know about the bankruptcy." Richard froze. He looked at the papers in Connor's hand. His eyes narrowed. "Your father sent you that, didn't he? He is trying to poison you against me." "Is it true?" Connor asked. His voice was trembling not with fear, but with a rage that had been building for 24 hours. "Are you trying to use my company to pay off your gambling debts?" Richard laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like a bark. "Your company," he sneered. "You do not have a company, Connor. You have a hobby that your daddy paid for. You think you are a CEO. You are a child playing dress-up in a suit that does not fit." Connor stepped back as if he had been slapped. This was the man who had praised his business acumen just last night. This was the man who had called him a visionary. "I defended you," Connor whispered. "I pushed my father for you." "And that was your choice," Richard snapped. "Now get out of my way." Richard lunged for the suitcase. He grabbed the handle and tried to zip it shut. "That is my jewelry," Brittany screamed, realizing what was happening. She ran forward, grabbing Richard's arm. "Daddy, that is my necklace. What are you doing?" Richard shoved her away. He shoved his own daughter with the same casual cruelty he had shown me. She fell back onto the bed, gasping in shock. "I need it for expenses," Richard yelled. "I have to get out of town. Do you think tickets to Chicago are free? Do you think a new identity is free?" "You are stealing from us," Connor shouted. He grabbed the other side of the suitcase. "I am not stealing," Richard spat, pulling the bag. "I am surviving. And frankly, you two owe me. I wasted 3 months in that boring house listening to you talk about your pathetic little startup. I deserve some compensation for my time." "You are a monster," Brittany cried, tears streaming down her face. "Grow up, Brittany," Richard said, cold and unfeeling. "The world is a transaction. Your father-in-law knows that. That is why he is rich and you are here in a Motel 6. He cut his losses, and now I am cutting mine." Connor did not let go of the bag. He was seeing red. "You are not taking her jewelry," Connor said. Richard looked at Connor. The mask was completely gone now. There was no sophistication left. Just the desperate, dangerous look of a cornered animal. "Let go, you useless little parasite," Richard hissed. "I am not a parasite," Connor yelled. "Yes, you are," Richard screamed right in his face. "You are nothing without your father's checkbook. You have no skills. You have no grit. You are soft, Connor. That is why Bill hates you. That is why he locked you out, because he knows you cannot survive on your own. And he is right. Look at you, fighting over a few trinkets in a dump." The words hit Connor harder than any fist. They were the truth, or at least they were the truth of who he had been up until yesterday. Richard took advantage of Connor's momentary shock. He drove his elbow into Connor's chest. Connor gasped and let go of the suitcase. Richard zipped it shut. He grabbed his coat. "Do not try to follow me," Richard warned, backing toward the door. "And do not call the police. If you do, I will tell them you were in on the loan fraud. I will drag you down with me." He opened the door. The cold wind rushed into the room. "Daddy, please," Brittany sobbed. Richard did not look back. He stepped out into the night and slammed the door shut. Connor stood there, clutching his chest. He looked at the closed door. He looked at his wife crying on the cheap bedspread. The room was silent except for the sound of a car engine starting outside. It was not a Bentley. It was a taxi Richard had waiting. Connor walked to the window. He watched the taillights fade into the darkness. He looked down at his hands. The hands that had pushed me. The hands that had signed contracts he didn't understand. The hands that were now empty. He picked up the loan application from the floor. He saw my note again. "Read before you sign. Dad." He realized then that I had saved him. If I hadn't sent that envelope, he would have signed. He would have been on the hook for $1 million to the mob. I had stripped him of his house and his car, but I had saved his life. But the price was high. He was alone. His idol had just robbed him and called him useless. Connor turned to Brittany. She looked up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks. "What do we do now?" she whispered. Connor walked over and sat next to her. He put his arm around her. It was the first genuine gesture of affection he had shown in years. "We stopped pretending," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He looked at my number, but he did not call. He knew he was not ready yet. He knew he had not earned the right to make that call. "We are going to sleep," Connor said. "And tomorrow we are going to sign jobs. Real jobs." "But my jewelry," she cried. "Let him have it," Connor said, his voice hardening. "It is the price of admission." Admission to what, she asked. "To the real world," he said. He did not know that outside in the dark, the wheels were already turning for Richard Sterling. He thought Richard had escaped. He did not know that the second envelope I sent to Philadelphia had also arrived, and the men who were waiting for Richard did not want jewelry. They wanted blood. Hunger makes men do desperate things, but greed makes them do stupid things. 3 hours after Richard Sterling stormed out of the motel room, I received a notification on my phone. It was the silent alarm from the master bedroom of the estate. The motion sensors had been tripped. I opened the app and watched the live feed in black and white night vision. What I saw did not surprise me, but it broke my heart. They had come back. They had broken a window in the library to gain access. The heating was still off, so the house was a tomb, but that didn't stop them. On the screen, I saw 2 figures moving frantically through the dark house. One was heavy and stumbling. The other was younger but moving with hesitation. Richard and Connor. They weren't there to sleep. They were there to loot. I watched as they burst into the master bedroom. Richard was holding a flashlight, his beam cutting through the darkness like a frantic knife. He went straight for the walk-in closet. He wasn't looking for clothes. He was looking for the wall safe hidden behind the mirror. Connor stood in the doorway shivering. He looked terrified. "We shouldn't be here, Richard." Connor hissed, his breath visible in the freezing air. "The police said we would be arrested. This is breaking and entering." "Shut up and hold the light," Richard snapped. He pulled the mirror away from the wall, revealing the steel safe. He spun the dial. He knew the combination, because Connor, like a fool, had given it to him months ago. I picked up my other phone. I dialed Officer Miller directly. "They are inside, Miller," I said. "Dispatch the unit." I hung up and watched the screen. The safe door clicked open. Richard reached inside. His hands were shaking. He pulled out a stack of documents and a velvet pouch. "Is that the money?" Richard asked, tearing the pouch open. It was empty. I had cleared the cash out weeks ago. Richard threw the pouch on the floor. He swept his arm across the shelf, knocking over jewelry boxes and old watches. "Where is it?" he screamed, his voice echoing in the empty house. "Where is the emergency cash, Connor? You said there was 50 grand in here." "I thought there was," Connor stammered, stepping into the room. "Dad must have moved it." "You lied to me," Richard roared. He turned on Connor, the flashlight beam blinding his son. "You brought me back here for nothing. I risked a felony charge for empty boxes." He pushed past Connor, heading for the jewelry box on the dresser. The one thing left. "That is my mother's necklace," Connor said, stepping in front of him. "You are not taking that." Richard laughed, a sound that was pure malice. "I am taking everything I can carry," he spat. "I need a lawyer, Connor, and this junk is going to pay for it." He reached for the necklace. Connor grabbed his wrist. "No," Connor said. For a second they just stood there, frozen in the beam of the flashlight. The old con man and the broken son. Then Richard snapped. "Let go, you useless coward!" Richard yelled. He swung the heavy flashlight. It connected with the side of Connor's head, with a sickening thud. Connor went down hard, crashing into the vanity table. Glass perfume bottles shattered. But Connor did not stay down. The pain seemed to wake something up in him. A lifetime of being pushed around. First by me for his own good, and then by this parasite for his own greed. Connor roared and launched himself at Richard. He tackled the older man around the waist. They crashed into the dresser and fell to the floor in a tangle of limbs and cursing. It was not a cinematic fight. It was ugly. It was pathetic. 2 grown men rolling on the floor of a freezing mansion, fighting over scraps. Richard was scratching and biting, desperate to escape. Connor was punching blindly, releasing all his rage. I watched it all from my warm apartment. I took no pleasure in it. It was like watching a wolf tear apart a sick dog. Then the room was suddenly bathed in blue and red light. The silent sirens of the police cruisers flashed through the broken window. Richard froze. He looked up, the blood trickling from his nose. "You idiot," he whispered to Connor. "You got us caught." The front door burst open. I heard the shouting from downstairs. "Police! Show me your hands!" Richard scrambled up. He tried to run toward the bathroom window, hoping to climb out onto the roof. But he was too slow and too old. Officer Miller and 2 deputies burst into the bedroom with guns drawn. "Freeze," Miller yelled. Richard stopped. He raised his hands. He was panting heavily. "It was him," Richard screamed, pointing at Connor, who was still on the floor, clutching his bleeding head. He broke in. "I tried to stop him, officer. I was trying to protect the property." Officer Miller didn't even blink. He holstered his weapon and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Richard Sterling Miller said, walking straight past Connor, "You are under arrest." "For what?" Richard sputtered. "I am the victim here." "For wire fraud, grand larceny, and identity theft," Miller said, spinning Richard around and slamming him against the wall. "We ran your prints from the coffee cup you left at the station this morning. You have outstanding warrants in Florida, Nevada, and New York. The FBI has been looking for you for 6 months. The click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had heard all year. Richard began to cry. Not tears of remorse, but tears of a man who knows the game is finally over. Connor sat up slowly. He looked at Richard in handcuffs. He looked at Officer Miller. He wiped the blood from his temple. "Am I under arrest too?" Connor asked, his voice dull. Miller looked at Connor. He looked at the broken window. He looked at the empty safe. "Technically, yes," Miller said. "Breaking and entering, trespassing." Connor held out his wrists. He was ready. He wanted it. Jail seemed simpler than this reality. But Miller shook his head. "Your father declined to press charges for the break-in," Miller said. "He said you have suffered enough. But you have to leave. Now, if you are found on this property again, I will not be able to stop the district attorney." Miller hauled Richard out of the room. Richard was screaming obscenities, cursing Connor, cursing me, cursing the world. Connor stood up. He was swaying. He looked around the room one last time. The room where he had grown up. The room where his mother had read him stories. Now it was a crime scene. He walked down the stairs. He walked out the front door past the police cars. Outside, the snow was falling heavily. A black sedan was parked near the gate. The engine was running. Connor saw it, and his heart lifted slightly. Brittany. She had come for him. He ran toward the car, limping in the snow. "Brittany," he called out. The window rolled down. It was Brittany, but she was not in the driver's seat. She was in the passenger seat. And driving the car was a man Connor recognized vaguely. An old boyfriend from college. Someone she had been texting just as a friend for months. Connor stopped. "Brittany," he said. "Where are you going?" She looked at him. She looked at his bruised face, his torn coat, his empty hands. She looked at the police cars behind him. "I can't do this." "Connor," she said. Her voice was flat. "I can't do poor. I can't do police. I can't do drama." "Brittany, we can fix this," Connor pleaded, reaching for the door handle. The lock clicked down. "Go home, Connor," she said. "Oh, wait. You don't have one." She turned to the driver. "Go." The car peeled away, spraying slush onto Connor's pants. He stood there watching the taillights disappear into the blizzard. He was alone. Truly alone. He had no father. He had no wife. He had no money. He had no house. He had nothing but the clothes on his back and the bruise on his head. He looked up at the security camera at the gate. He knew I was watching. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just nodded. A slow, painful nod of acknowledgement. He turned and began to walk. Not toward the motel, not toward the city, but just walking. Into the dark. I watched him go until he was just a speck in the snow. I turned off the monitor. The surgery was complete. The tumor had been removed. Now it was up to the patient to see if he would survive the recovery. 3 months is a long time when you are hungry. It is an eternity when you are alone. And it is a lifetime when you are stripping away 32 years of entitlement layer by painful layer. I drove down to the industrial district on a Tuesday afternoon. It was March. The snow had melted, leaving behind a gray slush that coated everything in a film of grime. I parked my truck across the street from the loading docks of Henderson Logistics. It was a massive warehouse where 18-wheelers came to vomit out crates of imported goods before heading back to the highway. It was noisy. It smelled of diesel fumes and sweat. It was the kind of place Connor used to drive past with his windows rolled up and the air conditioning on high, just so he wouldn't have to breathe the same air as the workers. But today, Connor was not driving past. I watched as the bay doors rolled open. A group of men walked out for their lunch break. They were wearing neon safety vests and steel-toed boots. They were covered in dust. And walking at the back of the pack was my son. I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight. The soft roundness of his face, the result of too many business dinners and expensive scotch, was gone. His jawline was sharper. His hair, which used to be styled with $40 pomade, was cut short and uneven, probably done by himself, in a bathroom mirror to save money. He walked with a limp. I knew that limp. It was the limp of a man who is not used to standing on concrete for 10 hours a day. It was the limp of a lower back that has been shocked into reality by lifting 50-pound boxes. He sat down on a concrete barrier away from the other men. He opened a brown paper bag. There was no sushi. There was no artisanal sandwich. He pulled out a Tupperware container. I zoomed in with my camera lens. It was pasta. Plain pasta with red sauce. The cheapest meal you can make. He ate it slowly. He did not look at his phone. He did not scroll through social media. He just ate, staring at the ground. I looked at his hands. 3 months ago, those hands were soft. They were manicured. They were hands that signed checks and swiped credit cards. Now, even from this distance, I could see the difference. They were red. They were swollen. I could see the white tape wrapped around his knuckles where the skin had split from the dry air and the cardboard boxes. He was building calluses. Finally. A foreman walked out onto the dock. He was a big man with a clipboard. He shouted something at Connor. The old Connor would have shouted back. The old Connor would have threatened to sue. The old Connor would have said, "Do you know who my father is?" But this Connor just nodded. He closed his Tupperware container. He stood up, wincing as his back straightened. He put his helmet back on and walked back into the dark maw of the warehouse. He was learning the most important lesson of his life. He was learning that the world does not owe him a living. He was trading his sweat for bread. I waited until his shift ended at 6 o'clock. I wanted to see where he went. He walked out of the gate. He did not get into a car. He walked to the bus stop. He stood there in the cold rain, counting the coins in his palm to make sure he had the exact fare. I followed the bus for 3 miles. It stopped in a neighborhood that realtors politely called up and coming, but everyone else called rough. Connor got off and walked into a 3-story walk-up building with peeling paint. I knew the landlord there. I had made a call 3 months ago not to pay Connor's rent, but to ensure that if a young man named Connor applied, he would be given a fair shot despite having no credit history. I parked down the block and watched. The light in a second-floor window turned on. I saw his silhouette. He was moving around a small room. I imagined what was in there. A mattress on the floor, a hot plate, a single chair. It was a far cry from the mansion. It was a far cry from the heated floors. But as I watched, I saw something that made me grip the steering wheel. Connor sat down at a small table near the window. He turned on a lamp, and he opened a book. He was not watching TV. He was not drinking. He was reading. I watched him for an hour. He would read, then he would write something in a notebook, then he would read again. He was studying. I found out later from the landlord that Connor had been asking about night classes for project management. He wasn't trying to be a CEO anymore. He was trying to learn the trade. He was trying to understand the business I had built, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. I saw him stand up and go to the sink. He washed his single plate and his single fork. He dried them and put them away. There was a discipline in his movements that I had never seen before. When he lived in the mansion, he would leave dirty dishes on the counter for the maids. He would drop his clothes on the floor for Brittany to pick up. He treated objects and people as if they were disposable. But now he owned almost nothing. And because he owned almost nothing, he valued everything. That cheap plate was his lifeline. That fork was essential. He turned off the light at 9 o'clock. He had to be up at 5 for the morning shift. I sat in my truck in the dark. I felt a lump in my throat. For 32 years, I had given him everything, and he had been nothing. I took it all away, and in 3 months, he had become something. He was tired. He was poor. He was lonely. But he was real. For the first time since he was a boy, I felt a spark of pride. Not the pride of a father watching his son receive a diploma he didn't earn, but the pride of a craftsman watching iron harden into steel. I started the engine of my truck. I wanted to go up there. I wanted to knock on the door and give him a hug. I wanted to write him a check and end this misery. But I didn't, because the cement wasn't dry yet. If I stepped in now, I would leave a footprint that would ruin the foundation he was pouring for himself. He needed more time. He needed to know that he could survive the spring just like he had survived the winter. I put the truck in gear and drove away. "Sleep well, Connor," I whispered to the rearview mirror. "You are finally becoming a Harrington." The winter finally broke in April. The snow melted into dirty puddles and the construction season began in earnest. I was visiting one of my old job sites not as the boss, but as a consultant. I liked the smell of wet concrete and sawdust. It cleared my head. It reminded me that everything in this world is built one brick at a time, and if you skip a brick, the wall falls down. I had skipped a few bricks with Connor when he was growing up. I had given him the roof before he knew how to build the foundation. But for the last 3 months, I had watched him pour that foundation with his own sweat. I walked out of the site trailer at 5 in the afternoon. The sun was still out, casting long shadows across the gravel lot. And there he was. Connor was standing near the gate. He was wearing his work boots and a flannel shirt that was 2 sizes too big for him now. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't pacing. He was just standing there waiting. In the past, Connor would have been honking the horn of his Mercedes if I was 5 minutes late. He would have been texting me complaining about his schedule. But today he stood as still as a statue. I walked over to him. I stopped about 10 feet away. He looked up. His face was tanned from working on the loading docks. There were dark circles under his eyes, but his eyes were clear. The glassy look of expensive scotch and arrogance was gone. He was holding something. It was a chair. It was not a piece of fine furniture. It was made of scrap wood. Pallet wood, mostly. I could see the nail holes where the slats had been pulled apart. The wood was sanded down, but it was still rough in places. The varnish was uneven. It looked like something a high school shop student would make in their first week. Connor saw me looking at it. He shifted his weight nervously. "Hi, Dad," he said. Hello, Connor, I said. He took a step forward. He held the chair out. It was heavy, solid oak pallet wood, not cheap pine. I wanted to give you this, he said. I looked at the chair. I didn't take it. Not yet. What is it? I asked. It is a chair, Connor said. I made it. You made it, I repeated. Yeah, he said. I found the wood behind the warehouse. The foreman let me take the broken pallets home. I bought a saw and some sandpaper at the pawn shop. I worked on it at night. I looked at his hands. I saw the fresh cuts. I saw the sawdust under his fingernails. I imagined him in that small dark room sanding this wood by the light of a single lamp, while his muscles ached from a 10-hour shift. Why did you make me a chair, Connor? I asked. He looked me in the eye. He didn't look down. Because I took yours, he said. The wind blew across the lot, kicking up dust. I took your chair, Connor continued, his voice steady. At Christmas, I told you that seat belonged to Richard. I pushed you out of your own spot. I can't buy that chair back, Dad. I don't have the money. And even if I did, you wouldn't want it. He paused. He swallowed hard. So I made this one. It is not pretty. It is not an antique, but it is mine. I mean, I made it with my own hands, and I want you to have it. He pushed it toward me slightly. So you can sit, he said, if you want to. I looked at the chair again. This was his offering. This was his penance. He wasn't asking to come back to the mansion. He wasn't asking for a loan. He was offering a seat. I stepped forward. I put my hand on the backrest. The wood was warm from the sun. It was rough against my palm. I gripped the back of the chair and gave it a shake. It wobbled. The left front leg was about 1/8 of an inch shorter than the others. The joinery on the seat was a little loose. If a heavy man sat on this, it would hold, but it would creak. I looked at the joints. He had used nails instead of screws in some places. He had used too much glue in others. As a master builder, I could have torn it apart with words. I could have told him it was garbage. I could have told him it wasn't up to code. But as a father, I saw something else. I saw hours of labor. I saw humility. I saw a boy trying to be a man. I looked up at him. He was holding his breath, waiting for my verdict. He looked terrified. He valued my opinion now more than he ever had when I was just writing checks. I took the chair from him. I set it down firmly on the gravel. I sat on it. It creaked. It wobbled slightly to the left. But it held my weight. I sat there for a long moment, looking at my son. He let out a breath he had been holding for 3 months. A small tentative smile touched the corners of his mouth. Then I stood up. I ran my hand over the armrest. I found a rough spot he hadn't sanded properly. It wiggles, I said. The smile faded from Connor's face. He looked crushed. Oh, he said. I measured it 3 times. You measured from the wrong angle, I said. And you used the wrong nails for oak. The wood split a little here at the joint. See that hairline crack? That will give way in 6 months. Connor looked at the crack. He looked like he wanted to cry. I am sorry, he whispered. I tried. I will throw it away. He reached for the chair. I put my hand on his wrist. I didn't say throw it away, I said. He froze. He looked at me. I said it wiggles, I repeated. I can't sit in a wobbly chair, Connor. A Harrington doesn't build wobbly furniture. I picked up the chair. I held it out to him. Take it back, I said. Connor looked confused. Take it back, I said firmly. Take it apart. Pull the nails out. Sand it down again. Drill pilot holes this time so the wood doesn't split. And measure the legs on a level surface, not the crooked floor of your apartment. Connor took the heavy chair. He held it against his chest like a shield. "Fix it," I said. "When it stands straight, bring it back to me. Then I will sit in it." I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes. I wasn't rejecting him. I was coaching him. I was giving him a second chance. Not a handout, but a chance to do the work. He nodded. His grip on the chair tightened. "I will fix it," he said. "I will make it perfect." "Don't make it perfect," I said, turning to walk to my truck. "Just make it solid. Perfect is a lie. Solid is real." I opened the door of my truck. I looked back at him one last time. "And Connor," I said. "Yes, Dad. Use wood glue mixed with a little sawdust to fill that gap in the seat. It hides the mistakes." For the first time in years, I saw a real smile on his face. It wasn't a smirk. It was a grin of determination. "Thanks, Dad," he said. I got in my truck and drove away. I watched him in the rearview mirror. He was already inspecting the leg, figuring out where he went wrong. He had a long way to go. But he had started, and that wobbly chair was worth more to me than the entire mansion I had locked him out of. The snow was falling softly outside, covering the driveway, where the repossession trucks had once dragged the luxury cars away. But inside the house it was warm. It was a different kind of warmth than the one usually bought with high-tech thermostats and heated floors. This was the warmth of a real fire crackling in the hearth, and the smell of pot roast slow cooking in the kitchen. I looked around my living room. There were no influencers here tonight. There were no investment bankers trying to sell me a bridge loan. There was just Leo Katz sitting on the sofa with a glass of cheap bourbon, laughing at a joke my old foreman Mike was telling. There were the kids from the local trade school I sponsored eating cookies and arguing about football. It was loud. It was messy. It was perfect. We moved to the dining room for dinner. The long mahogany table was set. The same table where I had been shoved. The same table where Richard Sterling had declared himself the patriarch. But the ghosts of that night were gone. I sat at the head of the table. I looked down the line of faces. Friends who had stood by me when I had nothing but a pickup truck. People who liked Bill Harrington, not the Harrington estate. But at the very end of the table opposite me there was a single empty place setting. And pushed up to the table at that spot was a chair. It was not one of the matching mahogany chairs that came with the set. It was made of oak pallet wood. The varnish was slightly uneven in the candlelight. But the legs were straight. The joints were tight. The wobble was gone. Connor had dropped it off on my porch 2 days ago. There was no note. There was no request to be invited to the party. Just the chair. Solid. Heavy. Built to last. Leo noticed me staring at it. "You didn't invite him?" Leo asked quietly, so the others wouldn't hear. I shook my head. "Not this year," I said. Leo nodded. He understood. He knew that Connor was currently working a double shift at the warehouse. He had volunteered for the holiday pay because he was saving up for a night class in structural engineering. He was spending Christmas in a forklift cabin eating a turkey sandwich from a gas station. Is that cruel, some might ask? To let my son work in the cold while I eat roast beef with my friends? Maybe. But I looked at that empty chair and I didn't see absence. I saw potential. For 32 years, Connor had sat at my table and he had never truly been there. He had been a ghost consuming everything and contributing nothing. Now he was absent in body, but for the first time his presence was real. That chair was the first honest thing he had ever brought to this house. I am not saving that seat for the boy who pushed me. I am saving it for the man who built it. I raised my glass. The room went quiet. To family, I said. The ones who are here. And the ones who are doing the work to get here. "Merry Christmas," everyone shouted. I took a sip of wine. I looked at the empty chair one last time. "The seat is ready, Connor. The wood is solid. The foundation is set. Keep working, son. keep grinding. When you walk through that door next year, you won't be a guest. You will be the man of the house, and I will be the one standing up to pull the chair out for you. The party is winding down now. The last of my friends have put on their coats and driven away into the snowy night. The house is quiet again, but it is not the heavy, suffocating silence of a year ago. It is a peaceful silence, the kind you earn after a long day of honest work. I stand by the bay window holding a glass of whiskey. I look out at the driveway. The snow is falling softly, covering the tire tracks, covering the scars of the past. It looks exactly like it did on that night when I watched my son walk away into the darkness with nothing but the clothes on his back. I know what people will say. I know what they whisper when they hear this story. They say I am a monster. They say I am a cold-hearted old man who chose money over blood. They say that a father's job is to protect his child from the storm, not to throw him into it. But those people have never built anything. They have never stood on a steel girder 40 stories up with the wind trying to kill them. They do not understand the physics of strength. You cannot make steel strong by keeping it warm. You cannot make it resilient by wrapping it in velvet. To make steel that can hold up a skyscraper, you have to put it in the fire until it glows white hot. You have to beat it with a hammer until the impurities are driven out. And then, when it is screaming with heat, you have to plunge it into the freezing water. The shock is terrible. The metal screams. But when it comes out of the water, it is no longer just iron. It is tempered. It is unbreakable. I was the fire. And this winter was the water. I look at the reflection of the room in the glass. I see the dining table behind me. I see the chair Connor made. It sits there at the end of the table empty and waiting. Some fathers leave their sons a fortune. I decided to leave my son something more valuable. I left him his own life. If I had opened the door that night, he would still be a child. He would still be living in my shadow, afraid of the cold, afraid of the world, dependent on a credit card he didn't pay for. He would be weak, and the world eats weak men alive. Now he is out there. He is tired. His back aches. His hands are rough. He is sleeping in a small room and eating cheap food. But he is free. He is free from Richard Sterling. He is free from Brittany. And most importantly, he is free from me. He is learning that he can survive. He is learning that he can fall down and get back up without my hand to pull him. I take a sip of my drink. It burns going down. That chair will stay empty for a while longer. I will not rush him. I will not call him. I will let him finish his renovation. But I know that one day the doorbell will ring. It won't be a boy asking for a loan. It won't be a victim asking for pity. It will be a man. A man who built his own foundation. A man who knows the value of $1 and the value of a promise. He will walk in. He will shake my hand. And he will pull out that chair and sit down. And on that day, the Harrington legacy will truly be safe. Because it won't be held up by my money anymore. It will be held up by his strength. I turn off the lights. I am ready to sleep. My name is Bill Harrington. I pushed my son off a cliff so he could learn how to fly. And if I had to do it all over again, I would push him harder. What about you? Do you think I went too far? Or do you think tough love is the only real love left in this soft world? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button. Because this story isn't over. It is just being rebuilt.